Hello friends, thank you for joining me. Today we'll be painting along with Bob as he paints Reflections. This painting features mountains and trees like many we've done before, but it focuses more on the details and the reflections in the water than others we've done in the past. If you've joined me before, thanks for returning. And if you're new to the channel and like what we're doing here, take a moment to click subscribe, like the video, and leave a comment to let me know what you think. I'm excited to start, so let's get painting, friends. All right, well, let's go over the colors we'll be using today. Titanium white, phthalo green, phthalo blue, Prussian blue, burnt umber, Van Dyke brown, alizarin crimson, sap green, cadmium yellow, yellow ochre, and permanent red. Starting out, I've got my 2-inch brush there, just picking up some of that crimson. And to prepare our canvas this week, it is a landscape orientation. Same 24 by 18-inch canvas we always use, with a thin layer of liquid white to prep it, to really help the colors to slide around and allow the blending to happen that's required for this style. I'm just going back and forth, just making some crisscrosses there. Put some nice pink hue in the sky. There was a few extra prep things we did for this episode. I put some fresh paint thinner in a little cup. And there's a new special technique that we'll be featuring a little later in the painting that requires that, and you'll see that. And then also I've got 2 2-inch brushes, 2 fan brushes, script liner, and then 3 1-inch brushes, and that plays into that new technique. Picking up some of the phthalo blue now, didn't clean off the brush. Going back in now above the pink area to add a little bit more variation in the sky color. You can see you really have to make quite a few crisscrosses before the blending really kicks in well and takes a lot of those lines out of the sky. And as Bob's doing this painting, he was kind of protecting some of the pink area from the blue, so I'm kind of trying to do that as well. Now a little bit of phthalo green added to that brush, which that phthalo green is a little thick. I think I need to add more oil to it. It just didn't want to pick up on the brush nice, but you can see there that it's going on the canvas just fine. Coming in from the sides to make some water at the bottom there. And it's so important to come in, as horizontal as possible here. And a few of these strokes just didn't turn out as well as I would have liked. And I feel like it kind of affects the end product. But it's all part of the process of learning and part of the journey. You can see I'm cleaning the brush there. Just going into my odorless paint thinner. Shaking it off into a trash can there to get most of the liquid off, and then beat the devil out. You can see on my palette there, I've got it covered in a different paper than I had last week. This week I'm trying freezer paper. Last time was butcher paper. I keep saying last week, but obviously I put these things out maybe once a month at best, once a year. It's a little bit more following the schedule. But the freezer paper did pretty good for me in this episode. It didn't absorb as much oil as the butcher paper had, and it definitely made cleanup very easy. And I've got my 2-inch brush there, just kind of blending now, back and forth, and bringing everything kind of together. Got my palette knife, picking up some alizarin crimson there. And just a little bit of Prussian blue. and apparently a bristle from one of the brushes. Definitely got to be on the lookout for those. And just a little bit of a phthalo blue as well. I'm mixing this together to make a really nice dark color, but still with a little bit of that glow in it from the crimson. Now just going back and forth there to add a little different kind of clouds than we usually have. We usually make our clouds using brushes, and I think this is the first time we've really used the knife to make the clouds. But, you can see clouds like these we really couldn't make with a brush. And, clouds come in all sorts of different types. So, it's always good to have different types of tools available to make them. Just trying to keep them really simple and minimal, but also have some interest to them and not just be a boring straight line by itself. Although I think you'd be pretty hard pressed to make a perfectly straight line using any of the tools that I've got here. That one's probably about the closest. And now back with that 2-inch brush, just trying to blend it all together. You have to be so light when you're doing this. You can see it smearing and kind of streaking there. Just trying to knock off some of the extra paint to keep it from just smearing all over the place. And I don't know if I'll just get better with this technique as I do it more, or if it's, something with the paint. I'm inclined to think it's probably more of a me issue, and then in time I'll get more of the hang of the right amount of pressure to use when blending. There's a few things in this painting I think that turned out like that. I've got some cad yellow. I'm just getting a little permanent red into that. You got to be really careful with that permanent red because it's just so strong. You can see how orange that's getting. That's going to be a little highlight, just the smallest little bits of the sunset captured in those clouds. I did this painting at 50% speed, just like I did the last one. And it really does help with being able to keep up with Bob. But I will say, when I was doing the prep work and watching it at full speed, it just seemed like Bob was just blowing through it. It's just amazing how fast he can do these paintings, and just the amount of detail he can get into them in such a short amount of time. Really tried on this camera angle to get the focus a little bit better for this episode, especially so that I could do these zoom in highlights to help show you what's going on. And I feel like it's a little bit better. Let me know what you think. Just knocking that brush off again a little bit there before going in and doing some blending. There's a lot of that in this episode where you kind of just knock the paint off the brush or wipe it off a little bit and not give it a full cleaning. Just picking up some more crimson there, old Prussian blue. going in. Darn almighty mountain. Bob says you got to really force the paint into the canvas when you're doing this, and you can see when I push it in, a lot of times it's just kind of smearing it and squishing it out from underneath the knife rather than pushing it into the canvas. I am getting better though. The more and more of these I do, the more I'm getting the feel for the right amount of pressure, what exactly he means. He's telling you to force it into the canvas. And that's what I'm trying to do here. Now, since this is kind of the base color for the mountain, you don't want to have too much paint on there because you're going to be adding quite a bit to it. Now real soft with that 2-inch brush, kind of pulling it together. Trying to keep the slope there maintained. I'm also realizing that I've kind of made my mountain a little small. So I'm kind of trying to stretch it out a little bit using my 2-inch brush there. And now we're going to make a reflection of that mountain, which is really just making the mountain using the exact same technique upside down, but there's a lot more subtlety to it. Holding the knife is totally different when you're trying to do it upside down. The way you do your strokes is different than when you do it upside down, and it just really more challenging than I was expecting. Also, the breaking point between Bob's real mountain and his reflection was a little closer to that water line, for obvious reasons. Reflection is generally occurring in water. So as I'm doing this, I'm kind of trying to pull it down a little bit further. Just pulling it a little bit with that 2-inch brush. Just trying to match the slopes that are above it and make that mirror image. Since it is a reflection, just blending it a little bit there. Another thing I'm sure you've noticed by this point is that I've got something on my wrist there. And what I've done is I've Velcroed my lavalier mic to my wrist to see if I could get a little bit better audio of the painting for this one. And I feel like it did a pretty decent job. You'll see that I kind of had trouble keeping it on my wrist in one place, and that kind of affected things. But overall, I think the sound quality is pretty good. My goal is to get as pure a sound as I can when I'm painting. Try to cut out as much of the background sounds and really, capture that kind of Bob Ross essence with the sound. You can see there I've made a highlight color and I'm going on to the sunny side of the mountains there. Nice snowy mountains. And that's just white with a little bit of permanent red in it. And I mean just the smallest amount of permanent red to give it a little bit of a pink hue and not overwhelm it. Because that permanent red, is the reason why they call it permanent red, because it's very strong. Now I've got some titanium white over there that I'm adding a little phthalo blue to make the shadow color for my mountains. I'm picking up a little bit of that red and blue mix from earlier too. Just add some more tones. And, as usual with Bob Ross's highlight colors, you don't want to overmix it. You want to leave it marbledy, because that adds so much detail without you even really having to try. Just pulling that down. trying to kind of bounce it along the surface, pull really lightly so that it leaves a good amount of that shadow color. Of course, you got to maintain those slopes while you do this. And as always, every highlight needs a shadow. If you put a highlight on somewhere and you don't put a shadow, it's going to look really weird. I'm just going back in with that 2-inch brush and gently tapping it at the bottom there, making it look a little mistier towards the base. And kind of bring it all together. Trying to really protect the stuff up towards the top so that it's nice and clear and crisp. Trying to be as light as possible there. Also trying to avoid messing up the reflection below there too. Trying to blend, kind of come over to this angle because I was really focused and got my head in the way of the other camera there. Now with my knife, I'm picking up some of that highlight color. The problem is, that's not my mountain highlight color. Oh, you fool! That's my cloud highlight color. Oh no! And I've realized the mistake I've made, and fortunately it didn't get too out of hand, but you know, what's done is done. The happy accidents happened, and so, you know, our reflection picked up a little bit more of the fire of the sunset than the mountain above it, you know, that it's reflected from, but that's okay. But if I hadn't said anything, you might not even notice. Just kidding. I know you would have noticed. But just like I did with the base color for the mountain, just trying to match exactly what I did with that highlight above, but upside down. And you can see I'm really kind of struggling with how to hold that knife, get the right kind of swooping action. I'm trying. But yeah, the good news is with a reflection, it doesn't have to look as good as the real thing. You know, if there's something that's a little wiggly about it or not exactly the same, it's fine. And you can see I'm pulling straight up there. Whenever I've done reflections before, it's always pull straight down. But in this case, because we want to protect the top of that mountain so that it looks a little bit more reflected, you got to pull up on those reflections. Yeah, there we go. And just mixing that mud. Oh. Cleaning off the brush in between strokes there. Really critical during this part. Bob's reflection looks awesome, of course. Looks just like the mountain above it. You know, I want a little bit more of the mountain in spirit. But for my first time doing an upside down mountain and then blending it into the background like that, I'm pretty happy. More or less. I've got my Van Dyke brown there with a little crimson. Mixing that into a nice dark color. Dark 1-inch brush. And now just kind of pushing in some trees off in the distance there. Of course, when you're putting these trees in, you're also deciding where the ground is and where, you know, the slope of the land. So it's important to try and picture that in your mind and then stick with that as you're doing the painting. Now, if you're painting along with Bob like I am, Having watched the episode beforehand really helps with that because you know what the end product's supposed to look like. And now with my 2-inch brush, trying to gently pull that down to create those reflections and establish where that shoreline is. And pulling across, trying to add a little bit more of that waviness that we get. Just having some troubles there. That's the lavalier mic from DJI Osmo pocket camera that I'm filming this on here, this angle. That's why this has so much better resolution than the other angle and lets me zoom in a lot more. Just mixing up a nice warm color there. And just adding some highlights to those trees I put in. And you gotta add those highlights in your reflections too. Picking up a little bit of that liquid white. Mix that together a little bit more. And whenever you're doing this, you've got to be really careful that you get that white mixed in with the colors really well, or you're going to end up putting white onto your canvas. There's white trees in this world. They do exist. So if you get a little bit of that in there, it's really not a big deal and doesn't look too out of place. But if you have a bunch of it, it can sometimes look a little wrong. Unless it's a winter scene, in which case it's just perfect. Got a little bit more green now in the highlights, and you'll see in this painting, as compared with the one we did last time, there is a lot more variation in the foliage color. A lot more fall kind of a feel to it. I'm just trying to keep a variation as I'm adding it to the canvas so that it looks like different types of plants living way off there, and making sure to add the highlights to the reflection too so that when I do this, it'll look really good. Theoretically, anyways. Van Dyke brown, some crimson, a little Prussian blue mixed in there too, and some sap green. Actually, maybe I didn't get any crimson. Maybe I was just getting sap green there. And that's just sap green, Van Dyke brown, and Prussian blue. Just trying to keep it on the palette there. And we'll bring in the fan brush out to play. With that, we're just going to add a couple little evergreens back in here. Add some more biodiversity to the painting. Biodiversity is important in the paintings as much as it is in the real world. And I don't have to worry about getting those too detailed because, of course, they're way off in the distance. And by making things less detailed off in the distance, it makes them look further away. Helps to add that depth to the painting. A nice big one there. That one comes all the way down to the shore. Get it cleaned off there. Trying to anyways. Clean my knife off a little bit better before I go into my liquid white. Running out of space to mix colors too. A little bit of that burnt umber there. Just kind of muddy that liquid white down. We're going to cut in our water line now. And in addition to the water line along the edge there, in this painting, Bob has us doing some water lines that are a little further out into the water, which gives it a little bit more life and motion and rippliness. Yeah. Bob always says to act like you're cutting a hole through the canvas when you're adding the water lines. Really, push those in, and you don't want to force it through the canvas, but you'd have to put so much force into it to get through these canvases. All right. Oh, now we're going into that paint thinner I was telling you about earlier that I had prepared separately for our new technique. And I'm also using a brand new 1-inch brush there too, because I was just so excited for this that I felt like it warranted a new brush. And now I'm just loading up with some Van Dyke Brown, but you can see I'm only loading on one side of the brush there. Now I flipped it over, and I'm going to load up with some white. And as those paints are transferring onto the brush there, they're mixing with that paint thinner, becoming a lot more liquid, more ink-like. Yeah, you can see white on one side and brown on the other. What that does for us is that lets us do a tree trunk in one stroke. And I was really happy with how that went. Load up with a little bit more there. And go in and do it again. And you got to make sure you're paying attention when you do this, that your light and dark sides of the trees are on the right side. But I mean, they just look really 3D. This technique works really good. I was really happy with how it turns out. And just trying to be slow and deliberate with my stroke there. Really controlled. Things are starting to get messy down there, and I'm running out of places to set my brushes. Cleaning off one of the other 1-inch brushes from earlier there. Now going in and getting some nice fresh paint thinner there. Trying to get some of that off because you don't want too much. And the last thing I want to do is bring a whole bunch of paint thinner up on the palette and mess up all my paints. And you can see I got some green, and I'm doing some yellow there. Loading it up in the exact same way. And just like we did the trunks at once, we're now going to do the highlight and shadow colors for our leaves at the same time. And you also want to make sure you're paying attention to which side's highlighted before you start putting the paint on there. Otherwise your tree's going to look a little funny. Trying to leave some airiness through there, still allow you to see the trunk a little bit, but get enough of the, I guess these pine needles probably in this case, on these trees so that they look lively and adds a little bit more to that side of the painting. And I feel like the foliage didn't go on quite as well as the trunks did. But for my first time doing this technique, I'm pretty happy. Need to find something a little bit better that'll hold the microphone, about there on my wrist, because I don't want it to be too far along, or it makes it more likely that I'll dip it in paint or something by accident. And now just adding some dark shadowy foliage there at the base of those trees, making a little peninsula sticking out into our water. And got my reflection brush back out there again, pulling it down and across. Now I'm getting my 1-inch brush that I did the trunks with before, loading it back up some more to go in and do another trunk, only this time we're doing them upside down. You can try, I got my highlight on the right side there. And with my foliage double brush there, load it up again. Making sure I got my shadows on top now. And just adding in some hints. And that was one thing, is that, Bob kept mentioning, just add the hints of the color in there. It doesn't have to be super detailed for it to look like a really good reflection, because the water's got life and the water's moving around. So having the colors in more or less the right places really does add to the reflection that you end up with. And I tried not to overthink it. I just couldn't keep it to stay on there tight. And pulling down now to turn those upside down trees into reflections. And pulling across to add a few ripples, and then sideways with the 2-inch brush to add some kind of currents in there, which I thought was really cool. And just got some more liquid white there, mixing up some more fun foliage colors. Getting a little permanent red in the mix there, which kind of reminds me of my Bobism for this episode, which is sparkler. And really, a sparkler refers to a shrub which stands out due to being highlighted with a good deal of permanent red. And of course, gotta have the reflection in there. That 1-inch brush, some liquid white, and some yellow ochre. Just trying to put in some more highlights that are a little different color. And that one went on kind of soupy. You want to be careful when you're mixing up your highlight colors and putting them on that you're not putting them on too thick, because it'll really glop up your painting fast. And turning those into reflections. Straight Van Dyke brown on the old knife there. Maybe not that much. We're just going to go in and add a little bank in here. Give these plants something to live on, as Bob often says. I'm just trying to give that bank a little bit more an organic feel to it, a little bit more of a natural shape. Got to be careful for those straight lines in painting. The natural world doesn't have so many straight lines in it. Now with the shadow color from the mountain, kind of going in and adding highlights to the ground. Add some, rocky bits and gravelly bits and just all the things you see along the edge of a river or lake. Of course, you got to add your water line in there to make it all complete. And I got my highlight brush back out there. We're just gonna add a little bit more in, kind of overlap that bank we just added a little bit to bring everything together. Now I got a 2-inch brush there, and I'm loading that up with the mix. I've got some Van Dyke brown and the burnt umber there. I'm just putting in some big old trees. Just amazing how fast you can paint with a 2-inch brush. Trying to provide some good coverage and a good base there for all the foliage that'll live there. Alright, we've got some brown there and getting a little bit more white. Now we're going to add another one of our big old tree trunks. This one's going to be a big one. All the way from the top of the painting. Just pulling that on down. And load it up one more time. We'll give that one a little friend. I really tried to make sure these two trees went up high enough because I felt like the sky on this painting was a little open. Like maybe I should have had clouds a little higher, made my trees on the right side a little taller, had my mountain be a little bit bigger, but you know, once again, the painting's done, and just things I can remember for next time. And those highlights and trying to make sure to protect some of that shadow. Those plants some dimensionality. Now at the end of this episode, Bob mentions that for our next painting, we're going to be doing a vertical canvas and that we should have it prepped with the bottom half painted black with a gesso allowed to fully dry, I presume. I haven't watched the episode yet, but can't wait to find out what that's all about, and I hope you'll join me as I paint along for that one. See, I picked up a little bit more red. Gonna go in and add a little sparkler. Trying to avoid having that unmixed white in there. I'm just thinking about the individual plant shapes as I'm doing this, trying to, you know, create individual shrubs and not just one giant mass of the same color. Yeah, there's picking up some of the green that had been mixed with the paint thinner there from doing the foliage color before, and that was really kind of drippy and gunky on the rest of it there. Some definite mud mixing. Ultimately, the green kind of, you know, blends in so it doesn't look too out of place, but when I was actually doing the painting and that was dripping down the canvas there, it was kind of stressful. Now that is one of the benefits to this painting style. By starting more towards the top of things and working your way down, if you do have something that drips or something that, you know, falls off your brush and glops up lower on the canvas, you have the ability to paint over that or to work that into your painting. It really is a very survivable type of thing when you're doing paintings that, you know, you paint from top to bottom. Trying to load up my 2-color highlight brush again. I'm starting to run out of pure colors, but that's okay because it's the blending of the colors that really is what makes these paintings, you know, seem, you know, pulled together. It really helps to create a single light that's lighting the whole thing, and it adds a lot of cohesion to the painting. Don't know if you can hear that, but fire truck's running by there. And just working back and forth, trying to create realistic looking branches with needles on them. Going into my linseed oil with my script liner brush there and pick up a little bit of brown. I'm just going to throw some dead branches on this tree here. You see that a lot in nature. You see these big pine trees, and you know, nobody's going out there landscaping this area, and so you're going to have dead branches. It's just part of the process. Really tried to add enough to make it look real, but not add too many. And I think I did pretty good. There's been times in the past where I've not been real happy with the branches that I've added using the script liner, and it felt like on this, it worked out pretty good. Going back in with that mountain shadow slash riverbank highlight color. And now using that fan brush, just picking up some of the various foliage highlights, kind of putting in some more grassy stuff there along the bottom, using that opportunity to kind of get into some of that as green drips a little bit more and work those out into the other colors so that they were a little less obnoxious. And getting my knife back out there. Get up a little white. And adding a little white to the liquid white. Just trying to wipe most of it off and leave a little bit on there so I can go in and do some water lines. But this water line is different because we're bringing it around and swooping kind of. Kind of show where it's eroded and then the water's kind of pulled back a little bit. You got kind of a little muddy area there that's exposed. I really like doing that. I thought it looked really good, and I don't know, felt real natural to me. And getting a little bit more of my bank highlight. Bring everything in together there. And with my fan brush again, just picking up some of those highlight colors. Yeah, make them sparkle a little bit more. I was real happy with that color. I felt like it really helped to add an extra layer in there, right along the edge. We're getting into the details now. Adding those little sticks and little things off in the shadows here and there. Little twigs and stuff that, you know, the details your mind picks up on, but you don't really consciously notice them. Having, you know, all these details in the parts of the painting that are a little closer up really does help to make them seem a lot closer and a lot clearer. Now I'm switching out for my 1-inch brush again. Just going to add a few more highlights. Yeah, I wanted to really kind of sparkle it up a little bit there. Having that grassy stuff that had that nice red and orange, I wanted to bring a little bit more of that up into the shrubbery there. Just adding a little bit more detail back in there that I just covered up. See, I almost added some in the back there and then stopped myself. You don't want it to be too detailed for the back. Now, going into my linseed oil again there with my script liner. Picking up some pure liquid red, permanent red. Which of course means it's time to sign. So, thank you for joining me again for painting number 21 in my journey. If you're not already subscribed, please take a moment to do so. And leave a comment. Let me know how I'm doing. I really appreciate everyone who's joined me so far, and I look forward to see what's in store for the channel. It's been a lot of fun doing these paintings, and I always enjoy doing them when I'm able to. I know it's not the most regular of posting schedules, but you know, I always want to be painting, and when I can, it just feels so good. There we go. Thanks for joining me again. Goodbye for now, friends. Have a great day.